I was never the kind of person who believed in the supernatural. I always leaned logical, practical. You know the type. The one trying to find rational explanations for everything. But what happened in that house, and what still happens, is the kind of thing that messes with your head. The kind that sticks with you. My name's Emily. I'm 28. This happened just over a year ago, when my husband, Brian, our little girl Lily, and I moved into a house out in Vermont, a small town called Middlebury. The place used to belong to my mom's mom, Helen. She lived there practically her whole life. After she passed, the house sat empty for months until, between money issues and wanting to get out of the city, we decided to make the move. We thought it'd be a fresh start, quiet place, away from the chaos. A good spot for Lily to play outside, grow up close to nature. At least, that's what we thought. From day one, the house had this weird vibe. It was an old wooden structure, paint peeling off, floorboards creaking with every step, and that heavy smell, stale wood soaked in dampness, the kind of stench that gets under your skin. But what hit me the most those first few nights was the silence. A thick, oppressive silence. Not the kind that calms you down, no. This was the kind that puts you on edge, like something was always about to happen. The first strange thing I noticed were the shadows. Tiny ones, quick flashes, always at the edge of my vision. At first, I figured it was just stress. Moving sucks, right? My brain playing tricks. But as days went by, they got worse. It felt like something small was walking around the house, in the hallway, near the back door, even outside in the garden. I mentioned it to Brian. He laughed, said it was probably just a squirrel or a raccoon. But here's the thing, there were no signs of any animals, no tracks, no normal animal sounds, nothing. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed the first truly disturbing thing. I woke up in the middle of the night with this weird feeling, a mix between a chill and a tickle on my face. When I turned on the lamp, I saw strands of hair on my pillow, but not human hair. These were thicker, unnaturally straight, an artificial blonde shade, almost plastic-like. Doll hair. I remember staring at those strands for a long time, trying to figure out how they got there. Lily had some dolls, sure, but none with that kind of hair. The next morning, I checked her room, turned everything upside down. All her dolls were small, with brown or red hair, nothing blonde, and definitely no plastic strands lying around. The following days got tense. I started noticing muddy footprints on our bedroom floor. At first, just one or two near the door. Then a full trail, like something small, barefoot, had walked from the porch all the way to the foot of our bed. Except it hadn't rained that night. And the weirdest part? The other rooms were clean. Those marks only showed up in our bedroom. That's when things started connecting. One morning, while I was having coffee, Brian called me into the living room. He looked pale, holding the curtain from the front window that faced the porch. I walked over, and there she was. A doll. Alone, sitting right in the center of the porch. She was about a foot tall, wearing a white dress, stained and grime-covered, and that same blonde hair. Same texture as the strands I found in my bed. Her face? That's what creeped me out the most. She wasn't pretty. Her eyes were too big, glassy, with a weird gleam. And that smile, twisted, like someone tried to carve a friendly expression, but messed it up bad. Brian asked if she was Lily's. I shot that down immediately. I'd never seen that doll before in my life. Our first reaction was to throw the damn thing away. Brian grabbed the doll, stuffed her in a plastic bag, and tossed her into the trash can behind the backyard. We spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it. But that same night, when we went to close the curtains, she was back. Exactly where she'd been, sitting on the porch, dressed dirty, staring straight at the living room window. From that point on, things only got worse. I started hearing noises around the house. Light footsteps, muffled giggles, like a kid was wandering from room to room. Only problem, Lily was always asleep during those sounds. One night, while brushing my teeth, I caught a glimpse of a small shadow darting down the hallway toward her bedroom. I ran after it, flipped on the light, and Lily was sleeping peacefully, like nothing had happened. But on the floor, right by the door, another trail of muddy footprints.
After that night, I started sleeping terribly. I'd wake up over and over with this creeping feeling that someone was watching me. You know that weird prickling sensation? Like something standing in the corner of the room, just staring? I got up several times to check. I'd pull back the curtains, turn on every light, sweep the whole house from top to bottom. But I never found anything. At least, not right away. But one night, around 3 a.m., I woke to a soft sound coming from the porch. It was faint, but constant, like something dragging its nails across the wood. I got up slowly, heart pounding, and when I cracked the curtain open just a bit to peek out, she was there, the doll, sitting again in the exact same spot, only this time her head was slightly tilted, like someone had moved her. What sent chills down my spine was realizing that when I turned to look at the living room door, she wasn't there anymore. I ran back to the window, and she was gone from the porch too. Vanished. Just like that. I swear on everything, it was only seconds between looking one way and the other. The next day, Brian noticed that someone had messed with his tools in the shed out back. A screwdriver was missing its place. Some boxes were left open. But the padlock was still locked, like no one had even been there. We started arguing.
Brian said I was getting paranoid, stressed from the move, adjusting to a new life, stuff like that. But me, I knew something was wrong. The presence in that house was getting stronger. That same week, something physical finally happened to me. I woke up with a scratch on my leg. 3 thin lines, parallel, like something small with tiny claws had run across me in the night. Brian thought I might have done it myself, but I knew better. I started locking our bedroom door every night, and just to be safe, I piled boxes in front of it. Lily started changing too. Once such a playful little girl, now quiet, withdrawn. One morning, when I went to wake her up, I found her sitting in the corner of her room, hugging her knees, eyes wide and unblinking. I asked what was wrong, and all she said was, "The yellow-haired girl, she's mad at us." My stomach dropped. I asked who the girl was. She just shook her head and wouldn't say another word. That night, before bed, I built up the courage and stepped onto the porch with a flashlight. I needed to be sure the doll wasn't there. And sure enough, she wasn't. But when I went back inside, I noticed something. Muddy footprints, starting right at the porch door, trailing down the hallway toward the bedrooms. I followed them, trembling. They stopped right outside Lily's bedroom door. That was the moment I first considered leaving, going to a hotel, anywhere. But Brian still didn't believe me. He said I was getting obsessed, seeing things that weren't there. The next morning, when we opened the front door to grab the paper, there she was, the doll, sitting, her dress even dirtier than before, like it had been dragged through wet earth. And in her arms, she held a bundle of hair, brown hair, just like Lily's. That night, Brian decided to throw the doll away again, but this time he wasn't taking chances. He drove to the town dump, 10 minutes away, tossed the doll into a metal bin, and waited until the garbage truck came to pick it up. Came home, relieved. But guess what? The next morning, she was back, sitting on the porch, same spot as always, same crooked smile. But this time, her dress was soaked, like she'd crawled out of something wet. After that, I started having memory lapses, losing track of time, forgetting what I did the day before. I began finding things out of place. My hairbrush showed up in the fridge, my shoes on top of the laundry room cabinet. Brian changed too. He became more irritable, aggressive, like he was always angry about something he couldn't explain. Then one night, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound I'll never forget. The sound of the porch door opening by itself. I ran to the living room, and there it was, swinging open, swaying in the cold wind. On the floor, muddy footprints, leading straight inside. But these prints were different this time. Not just small. They looked like bare feet with twisted toes, like the bones were warped and broken. I followed the trail, heart in my throat. It passed through the living room, down the hallway, and stopped right outside Lily's bedroom door. I froze. Slowly, trembling, I opened the door. Lily was standing in the middle of the room, staring straight into the corner, where the doll was. Yes, inside her room. Lily was standing in the middle of the room, still, staring into a corner. And there, on the floor, was the doll again. This time, she wasn't just muddy. Her face had fresh cuts, like someone had dragged a knife or something sharp down it from top to bottom. Her head was slightly twisted, and her eyes, you know, those glass ones, they looked different, like they'd sunk deeper into her head, like they were watching. I stepped in slowly, called Lily's name, but she didn't respond. I dropped to my knees in front of her, gripped her shoulders. She was ice cold, like she'd been locked in a freezer for hours. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. She said, "She's staying now." It froze me solid. I asked who she was, but Lily only closed her eyes and started crying softly. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the bed, door locked, phone in hand, almost calling the cops. What would I even say? There's a doll haunting me? Sounded ridiculous, but the fear, it was real. The fear, it was physical. Around 4 a.m., I heard footsteps, small, fast, moving from the living room down the hallway. Then, right after, the sound of something falling, crashing onto the kitchen floor. I ran out and found it. The salt shaker, shattered, salt scattered everywhere. In my grandma's old stories, spilt salt was always a bad omen. But what scared me most was realizing there were tiny footprints walking straight through the salt. Footprints that didn't belong to any of us. They were too small, like a child's. From that day on, things got worse. Lights flickered and burned out on their own. Doors slammed shut in the dead of night. And the smell, a stench of wet earth, began to seep through the whole house, especially at night. Even with all windows closed, even when it hadn't rained. One day, while cleaning Lily's closet, I found a bundle of hair tangled inside one of her socks. They were synthetic, doll hair. But the thing was, they were cut unevenly, like they'd been ripped out by force. I asked Lily where they came from. She only whispered, "She doesn't like it when I hide her things." I talked to our neighbor, Mrs. Parker, an older woman in her 70s who lived 2 houses down. She was the first person who seemed to truly understand what I was going through. When I mentioned the doll, her face turned pale. She lowered her voice and simply said, "Your grandmother messed with things she shouldn't have." I asked what she meant, but Mrs. Parker refused to say more. She said it was already too late, that whatever it was already inside your house. Brian started having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming, saying something was pulling his feet at night. One night, I found him standing in the hallway, eyes wide open, but completely gone. He kept muttering that he saw a girl standing at the foot of our bed. A girl in a dirty dress, yellow hair, with lifeless eyes. I tried reaching out to the town church. The pastor listened, but it felt like he just wanted to end the conversation. He said he could come over for a blessing, but never showed up. As weeks passed, I started questioning my sanity. The whole house felt alive. Walls groaned at night. Cabinets swung open on their own, and the living room clock always stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. every single time. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until everyone was asleep, then went out to the porch, grabbed the doll, hands shaking, and decided this time I was burning it. Put her in a metal bucket, poured alcohol over her, struck a match. For a second, it looked like it worked. Flames rose, the stench of melting plastic filled the air. But then, every light in the house shut off. Total darkness. And in that pitch-black silence, I heard it. A laugh. Thin, shrill, coming from inside the house. I ran back inside, tripping over furniture, heart pounding. When the lights came back on, the doll was sitting again on the porch, like nothing had ever happened. After that, Brian started talking about leaving, said he couldn't take it anymore. We were getting sick in that house. Me? I agreed. But before that, I needed to know one thing. I went down to the basement. My grandma used to store stuff down there, and that's where I found it. A dusty old box. Inside, old photos, and among them, one photo that made my blood run cold. It was a child, a little girl, sitting on that very porch, in a dress nearly identical to the doll's. But the worst part? She was holding the same doll in her lap, the exact same one. On the back, written in my grandmother's handwriting, was a single sentence. She never left. That night, After finding the photo, I sat on the basement floor for almost an hour, staring at that yellowed piece of paper like it could give me all the answers I so desperately needed. My hands trembled and my stomach twisted like I'd swallowed a stone. That image, that girl holding the doll on the exact same porch where the doll kept appearing, it felt like time had folded in on itself, like things inside that house no longer followed a straight line. As I stared at my grandmother's handwriting, trying to make sense of those words, she never left. I started remembering all the strange little things she used to do when I was a kid. Small things, but now looking back, they made more sense than ever. The windows, always locked after 6 p.m., mirrors covered with sheets on certain nights, and that old habit of hers, scattering salt by the doors and windows, like she was protecting the house from something. I always thought it was just superstition, one of those old folks' quirks passed down through generations. But now, I wasn't so sure. Holding the photo, I went back upstairs to my room. But halfway there, I heard a sound coming from Lily's bedroom. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't think twice. I ran and shoved the door open. Inside, I found Lily sitting on the floor, her back pressed against the wall, knees pulled tight to her chest, arms wrapped around herself, eyes wide and locked on a corner near the dresser. I followed her gaze, and of course, there she was again, the doll, sitting once more, dress stained, one arm stretched out, pointing toward the door like it meant something. My first instinct was to grab her and throw this cursed thing away again. But as I tried to move, I heard a crack beneath my feet. I looked down and saw them, the marks. This time, the muddy footprints weren't just on the wooden floor. They climbed up the walls, all the way to the ceiling. Tiny, chaotic, like something had crawled upside down through the house. For a second, my vision darkened. A wave of dizziness hit me, like the air had thickened, turned heavier. I took a deep breath, grabbed Lily by the arm, and pulled her into our bedroom, locked the door, pushed furniture against it, and we stayed there, huddled together, trembling in silence. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. The next day, I went to the town library. I needed to know more about the house, my grandmother, and anything tied to that damned doll. I spent hours flipping through old archives, local newspapers, public records, anything I could find. And there, just before giving up, I found a newspaper clipping dated 1974.
It reported the disappearance of a little girl named Emily Carter. The name didn't sound unfamiliar. I kept reading, and the shock hit when I saw the photo beside the article. It was the same girl from the photo in the basement. Emily Carter, resident of the very house I now lived in with my family, vanished mysteriously at age 7 during a stormy night. According to the paper, neighbors said they heard screams coming from the house, but when police arrived, the girl was simply gone. And what chilled me to the bone was the final line. The only thing found on the porch that morning was a doll, wearing a yellow dress with mud on its feet. I drove home like a madwoman, heart racing, hands sweating on the wheel. The sun was setting, and I had a terrible feeling, a gut-wrenching sense that if I didn't do something tonight, something far worse was going to happen. When I got home, Brian was in the living room, head in his hands, looking completely lost. He looked up at me with empty eyes and said he'd seen Lily talking to herself in the backyard, whispering to nothing at all. I ran outside, and there she was, standing still, face pale, staring at the tree at the edge of the yard. I asked what she was doing, and she whispered, "She said I have to stay here until the right time." I asked what time that was, but she didn't answer. She just turned and walked back into the house. That night, around 3:17 a.m., I woke to a loud crash from the kitchen. A thunderous noise, like every pot and pan had fallen at once. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and crept downstairs, heart lodged in my throat. The first thing I saw was the wall clock stopped exactly 3:17 a.m. again. Always the same time. The kitchen floor was soaked, like someone had dumped a bucket of water, but there was no sign of a leak. And in the middle of it all, there she was, the doll, sitting, drenched, dress clinging to her body, hair stuck to her plastic face, and her eyes, deeper than ever, staring straight at me. I felt my body tingle, my hands went numb, my breathing faltered. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then I heard it, a whisper, close to my ear, so real, so near. I actually felt the cold air brush against my neck. "It won't work." The voice was a child's, but layered, like it had been recorded and played back in a distorted tone. I dropped the phone, it splashed into the water, and I ran up the stairs, slammed the bedroom door shut, pushed the wardrobe against it, and then came the worst part, the scream, one I'll never forget. It came from Lily's room, the kind of scream that tears through the air, raw, desperate, filled with pure terror. I burst through the door, and what I saw destroyed me. Lily was standing by the window, eyes rolled back, shaking, murmuring things I couldn't understand. The doll lay on the floor, knocked over,
head tilted upward, watching everything. I grabbed her, shook her, screamed her name over and over, until suddenly she collapsed in my arms. Brian showed up seconds later, and we raced to the hospital. She stayed under observation for 2 nights, running a high fever, unresponsive to stimuli. The doctors called it extreme stress, but nobody could explain it fully. While Lily was in the hospital, I decided to do something I should have done from the start. I went to the town cemetery, looked for my grandmother's grave, and beside it there was another, small, with a simple headstone. No date of death, just a name, Emily Carter. And right there, in that moment, I realized everything was connected. My grandmother, the missing girl, the doll, and now my daughter. I drove home with my head pounding. The road from the cemetery to our street felt longer than ever. Each turn, every traffic light, every red signal, like time had slowed down just to torture me more. I parked in front of the porch, and of course, there she was, the doll. Sitting, as always, legs crossed, head slightly tilted to the left, eyes fixed on the front door. This time, there was a new detail, one that made what little blood remained in my face drain completely. In the doll's lap lay a small piece of paper, folded roughly, like a note left on purpose. I approached slowly, heart slamming in my throat, knelt down and picked it up. My hands shook so badly I could barely unfold it. The handwriting was childlike, shaky, uneven, like it had been scribbled by someone who barely knew how to hold a pencil. It read only, "One more to go." I froze right there on the cold porch floor, staring at those words, trying to understand their true meaning. One more. Who? One more what? One more person? One more night? One more disappearance? It was like the house was playing with me, like everything was being orchestrated in a sick, meticulous way, like a game I never wanted to be part of. I went inside, locked every door and window, pulled the curtains shut, and sat on the floor of the living room, all lights off. The silence inside the house was suffocating. Even the air felt heavier, like it was made of glass. Hard to breathe, hard to swallow. My phone was dead, soaked since that night in the kitchen. Brian had gone to pick up some clothes for Lily at the hospital, so I was alone. Completely alone. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Small ones, coming from upstairs. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just the house creaking or my imagination. But the footsteps kept going. Steady, slow, the unmistakable sound of bare feet walking across wooden floors.
I took a deep breath, grabbed a flashlight, and started climbing the stairs, each step groaning louder than the last, like the house knew I was coming, like it was warning me to turn back, not to keep going. When I reached the top, I realized the steps were coming from my grandmother's old room. The door, which I'd locked weeks ago, was now slightly ajar. The smell of mold and damp wood was strong, almost choking. I pushed the door open slowly, and what I saw was worse than anything I could have imagined. The room was dark, but with the flashlight I could see clearly. The doll was there, sitting in my grandma's rocking chair, and around her, scattered across the floor, were dozens of strands of hair, blonde, long, identical to the doll's. But what truly paralyzed me was realizing that next to the doll, on the armrest of the chair, was my daughter's necklace. The same one she wore every day, the one she never took off, not even to sleep. My stomach twisted. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. I wanted to vomit, but I couldn't move. Then, without warning, the rocking chair moved on its own, a slow, deliberate sway, forward, backward, forward, backward. And then I heard it again, the whisper, low, nearly inaudible, but close, too close. She's coming. I spun on my heel and ran out of the room, stumbling down the stairs. I ran to the basement. I don't know why exactly. Maybe instinct. Maybe because this place felt like where it all began. I turned on the light and started rummaging through old boxes, dusty furniture, searching for anything that could give me answers, a way out. That's when I found it, at the bottom of an old trunk, a worn leather-bound journal with my grandmother's initials engraved into the cover. The pages were yellowed, stained with moisture, but some parts were still readable. And there, it was all there. Her accounts from decades ago, describing exactly the same things we were going through now. The doll, the footprints, the strands of hair, the whispers. And then one final entry written in a different, shakier handwriting, like she'd scrawled it in a panic, almost desperate. The cycle always restarts when the house stays empty for too long. And the doll, she always returns to the porch until she chooses another child. I slammed the journal shut, and one thought echoed in my mind. We had to get out of this house right now. Not one more night here. I ran upstairs, grabbed some clothes, documents, whatever I could carry, and rushed to the hospital to find Brian and Lily. But when I got there, a nurse met me at the entrance, led me to the reception desk with an expression I'll never forget.
He spoke softly, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. Your daughter, she disappeared from her room less than 20 minutes ago. My world collapsed. I ran through the hospital corridors, searching everywhere, asking everyone, doctors, nurses, security. No one had seen anything. The room where she'd been had the window open, and on the sill there was one detail that almost made me lose my balance. Tiny, muddy footprints starting at the window, trailing across the floor, heading down the hallway, and then vanishing. I drove back home like a zombie, not knowing what to do, my head spinning, hands shaking. And when I pulled up, almost afraid to look ahead, of course, she was there, on the porch, the doll, alone, as always, sitting, with a new addition in her lap, Lily's necklace. I don't remember exactly how I got out of the car. I think my body just moved on its own, like desperation had finally overtaken fear. I ran up to the porch, nearly tripping over the steps, dropped to my knees, and grabbed Lily's necklace in my hands. It was hers. I'd recognize that star-shaped pendant anywhere. The metal was still warm, like it had just come off her neck. My head spun. I tried to form a plan, think rationally, but with every passing second, panic choked me tighter. My first instinct was to go inside and search every room, open every closet, look under every bed, behind every door. And that's exactly what I did. I started downstairs, running from room to room, screaming Lily's name, even though I knew she probably wouldn't answer. Then I climbed the stairs, opened her bedroom, the bathroom, mine, my grandmother's. But what I found was worse than emptiness. On the hallway floor, between my daughter's room and my grandmother's, was a new trail of footprints. Only this time, they were clearer, deeper, like whoever left them was wet or dragging mud behind them. And what chilled me most, the prints were too small for an adult. Tiny, with a strange shape, almost like doll feet. I followed the trail, down the stairs, through the living room, heading straight toward the basement door. I froze for a few seconds, staring at the rusted knob, the old corroded handle.
I took a deep breath, gathered every last bit of courage I had, and went down. The smell hit harder than ever, a mix of damp wood, earth, and a faint metallic scent like oxidized iron. I turned on the light and right away noticed that the trunk where I'd found my grandmother's journal was open again. Only now it was empty. The space where the diary had been was gone, as if someone had taken everything else with it. On the floor, beside the trunk, more strands of hair. More strands of hair. This time, so many. It looked like someone had ripped an entire handful from a doll's head. And in the corner, almost hidden behind a tool shelf, I saw something that made me lose my breath. Lily's dress, that little blue one, her favorite, crumpled, dirty, with dark stains I refused to let myself identify. I ran back to the stairs, but before I could climb up, I heard a sound that froze me solid. A laugh, low, muffled, almost like it came from inside the walls. A child's giggle. I didn't hesitate. I flew up the steps, 2 at a time, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. Back in the living room, that's when I realized the doll was gone from the porch. I checked the window, searched every visible corner, but she was just gone. Suddenly, the house felt even quieter, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And then I heard the back door slam. I ran to it, threw it open, and the backyard was empty. But the gate, that wooden one that never closed properly, was slightly ajar. I ran out, sprinted through the garden, screamed Lily's name, looking into every shadow, behind every tree, every bush. And near the fence, almost at the edge of the woods, there she was. The doll, sitting on the ground, leaning against a tree trunk, with Lily's blue dress neatly folded beside her, like someone or something had placed it there on purpose. What nearly made me collapse to my knees. In the doll's tiny fabric hand was a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, and once again, the same shaky, distorted, childlike handwriting. Now it's your turn. I ran back inside, clutching the doll like I could somehow control it, locked every door, and sat on the living room floor, hugging my knees, the doll lying beside me, not knowing what else to do. Hours passed. I lost all sense of time. The sky outside began to lighten, and I finally closed my eyes for a few minutes, exhausted, defeated. When I woke, it was morning. I stood slowly, walked to the front door, and when I peeked through the window, there she was, the doll, back on the porch, sitting
Same fixed stare, head tilted like she'd never left. And beside her, a new detail that stopped me cold. Lily's shoe, covered in mud, carefully placed at the doll's feet. My scream was involuntary. I ran outside, grabbed the doll, hurled her across the yard, and started hitting her with all the rage and despair built up inside me.
But she just lay there, unmoving, like nothing I did could hurt her. It was in that moment, while I was still kneeling, sobbing, that Brian arrived. He found me like that and tried to understand what was happening. But how could I explain it? How could I put into words everything we'd been through? I told him what I could, between sobs, and for the first time, he looked at me like he believed every word. We decided we couldn't stay another minute. We packed what we could, grabbed documents, essentials, and left that house without looking back. But here's the worst part. Even now, days later, here in the hotel where we're staying, last night, when I pulled open the curtain, there she was, sitting on our small balcony. Same hollow stare, head slightly tilted to the side, like always.
And what shattered me inside was the detail. In her hand, Lily's necklace, that star pendant I'd seen on the porch of our house, now dangling between the doll's stitched fingers. I froze, hands trembling, eyes burning, a mix of fear and disbelief. It took me several seconds to finally turn away, and when I called for Brian, struggling to find words, all I could say was, She's here." He came to the window, yanked the curtain open, but the porch was empty. Of course. Wet from the rain, plastic chairs, everything still there except her. Brian looked at me with a mix of concern and pity, like he was wondering if I was finally losing my grip. I could only sit on the edge of the bed, staring into nothing, breath uneven, eyes burning, that suffocating feeling crawling back in, like this wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, early, we went straight to the local police station. I knew from their perspective everything I had to say would sound like the ramblings of a desperate mother, but I had to try. I explained everything, from Lily's disappearance to the footprints, the notes, the doll. The officer who took our report was polite, but I could feel it in the pauses, in the glances. He didn't take any of it seriously. "Ma'am," he said gently, "it's common in missing person cases for family members to go into shock, start mixing dreams with reality." He asked me to fill out a report, describe Lily's clothes, her appearance, last places she was seen. Brian, with that tired look, pulled me aside before I started talking about the doll again. He whispered, "They won't understand. No one will." And I knew he was right. We spent the next 2 days in that hotel, barely sleeping. Every hallway noise, every creaking door felt like a warning. I started noticing little things. The strands of hair came back on the pillow, on the bathroom floor, on the carpet near the door. Always the same fine, blonde, synthetic texture. Brian grew more anxious, more irritable, tension eating away at his patience slowly. One night, after another outburst, he left the room saying he needed air, needed a smoke outside. I stayed alone, sitting on the floor, back against the door, phone in hand, dialing the police number only to hang up before it rang. That's when I heard it. That sound, a dragging fabric coming from the balcony, slow, deliberate, like someone moving something across the floor. Heart pounding, I crept to the curtain, pulled it slowly, and right in the middle of the room, exactly in the center of the carpet, was something that hadn't been there before. The doll. She was there, sitting, motionless, dead center in the room, like she'd been placed there deliberately. What stole my breath was what lay in her lap, Lily's other shoe. Now both were there, both caked in dried mud. When Brian returned, I found the strength to do what I should have done from the start. I shoved the doll into a plastic bag, taped it shut, then sealed it inside another and another, building a kind of capsule, as if I could contain whatever this was. We drove to a remote field, an open clearing, where we stopped the car. Without a word, we got out, walked a few meters, and I hurled the doll with everything I had into a creek running nearby. She sank fast, disappearing into the dark water. For a moment, I felt a strange relief, almost hope. We thought maybe this was the end. But dry, unblemished, with both of Lily's shoes at her feet, and a new note written in that same childlike scrawl. "You really thought you could get rid of me?" That's when Brian, for the first time, truly lost control. He grabbed the doll, carried her down to the car, and locked her in the trunk. Said he was taking her as far away as possible. I stayed behind, lying on the bed, trying to breathe, waiting for him to come back. 2 hours later, the room phone rang. When I answered, all I heard was a low whisper, raspy, coming from someone or something breathing irregularly. "Now it's your turn." Then the line went dead. Brian never came back. 2 days later, they found his car abandoned on a dirt road over 50 miles away. The trunk was empty. And guess what?
When I stepped off the elevator that morning, heading to the front desk for news, there she was, the doll, sitting in the lobby chair like she'd been waiting for me. Now I'm here, recording this audio in this stifling room, not knowing what else to do. Every time I close my eyes, I see Lily's face, hear that laugh, feel those strands of hair on my bed, and I know sooner or later she'll appear again. On the porch, or worse, inside the room. And with each passing night, I become more certain of one thing. The next is me. If you made it this far, it means somehow you're still safe. Subscribe to the channel because I need to know that on the other side of this screen, someone is listening. Leave a comment below. Have you ever seen something waiting for you outside in the dark? Hit like if you heard the whisper too.